Canada. So initially I was thinking about the food system around this city, but we received a grant from the Mexican government to first develop the platform. So we started kind of thinking about how this tool might be useful to many different local food systems. So we ended up making a tool that is open for anyone to use. You can upload your information as a producer in any part of the world, and you will immediately be kind of linked up with the network. Right now we do have producers from Mexico, the US, Canada, and Belgium and France as well. So really we do intend this tool to be something that you can use from anywhere in the world.
Okay. Can you explain us what is a local food system? I think it's an important issue for the people to know.
Yeah. So the way that I think about local food systems is not so much about the distance that food has traveled. It's more about how close the connections between the producer and the consumer are. So traditionally in the global food system, one apple will pass through many different hands before it reaches the consumer. It'll go to first kind of a packager, and then to a distributor, and then to the grocery store, and then eventually it'll reach the consumer. Local food systems or local food chains are really about shortening that distance so that the producer is able to hold on to more of the value and the consumer is able to more clearly trace where their food is coming from. So it's about building those relationships, it's about retaining that value inside of the community, and making sure that those dollars are circulating locally.
Because of that, why it's important that a person know who grows their food?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of reasons. One of them is the social reason. You know, it's really, it brings a particular value to your food when you know who produced it, you know how it was produced. The other big reason is the economic value that you're kind of giving to the producer. So right now in the United States and Canada, but really all over the world, we are kind of facing this continuing farm crisis where producers are seeing dropping revenues, both from falling food prices and from them getting a smaller segment of the final consumer price. So for consumers, it's really a very powerful way to directly support a producer and ensure that their livelihood is stable well into the future.
What would you say about, for example, if I want to buy something in with a local producer, maybe I think it's not reliable, and I prefer to go to Walmart or this kind of supermarkets to buy my stuff?
Yeah, so the reason that grocery stores have become so ubiquitous or so common is you are going to find the exact same quality every time you go into the store. That's true. That's the advantage that people see. But I think what's hidden behind that is all of the waste that doesn't live up to those standards, all of the pressure that puts onto the producer, and ultimately it's a system that is really disadvantaging a lot of people for the benefit of very few. So I recognize that it's probably more work on behalf of the consumer, and maybe not everyone is going to want to do that. But that's why we want to develop these tools and develop these spaces to reduce the amount of work that consumers have to do to shop local and really make it a more accessible system for every consumer.
Okay, now tell me about your epic travel.
Yeah.
Why did you do this amazing trip from Monterrey?
Yep.
To Canada?
Yeah, so we did this trip in the summer of 2017, and really the inspiration was I was starting my master's program in Toronto. We'd been living in Monterrey for about 8 months or so, and we'd been getting to know the local food system in this one part of Mexico, and I knew it a little bit in Toronto, but we realized that as we were traveling up this way, we really had no experience with the unique local food systems all along our route. So we got this idea to just start contacting people before we left, people that were working in local food or even just working in food production or provisioning of some kind. And we had an amazing response. We reached out to 8 different organizations that were willing to work with us to develop these videos. And we ended up getting to interview, I think, around 30 local food advocates, producers, and just generally people working on making our food system more sustainable and reliable. So it was an incredible experience. We came away with like a much better understanding of who's producing our food, what are some of the challenges that they're facing. That was really one of our biggest interests, is what are some of the unique challenges that people face at different local levels, and we got some incredible responses. And then on top of that, some incredible work that's being done to overcome those challenges. So that was really inspiring to see.
And please tell me about what are these challenges, or what were your findings after the trip?
Yeah, so the challenges are different depending on which part of the food system they're working in. So producers in particular, some of their major challenges are land prices and land access. So this is true really across the world. As land is becoming more desirable as an investment or as a development opportunity, agricultural land is becoming much more expensive. So a lot of young and beginning farmers are really struggling to find land that they can afford. And that's putting a huge pressure on our food system and on the people who grow our food. On top of that, we have an aging farming population across North America. So the average age of the US farmer is hovering around 60. So that's really putting pressure as well on the younger generation of how are they going to take up this work? Are they going to be able to kind of fill that role of the aging farmers? And then I think on the sales side, some of the biggest challenges that they face are with consumer demands and consumer knowledge. So they're really having to work to overcome some of those expectations that consumers have gained through this global food system that maybe aren't so realistic. So expectations like the availability of produce year-round, the way that produce looks. Maybe consumers aren't used to seeing things that are a little bit lumpy, but they're still perfectly good to eat and perfectly nutritious. So for a lot of organizations, it's really education. How can we teach people about what does real food look like, and what can we really be putting into our bodies?
You're so crazy now.
What are the difference that you found among Mexico, USA, and Canada? Mm-hmm. And what are the commonalities?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think that some of the commonalities are, I'm trying to think how to phrase this exactly. Everyone has pride in what they do specifically. So in Mexico, you still have the pride of, the tortilla came from here, and you want fresh and good quality tortillas, or the best avocados in the world come from Mexico, and everybody knows that, and everybody's proud of that fact. I think the same is true for Canada. You're proud of the things that come from your province, from your area. The biggest difference that I found is when talking to people in Mexico about the importance of buying nutritious food, for just about everyone, the real thing is concern over the health and safety of the food you're consuming. And in Canada and the US, we're fortunate enough that that's not something that people really think about anymore. You don't think about the quality of the water that's being used to grow your crops, or whether fruits and vegetables are safe to consume, but you do still hear a lot of concern about the health and safety within the food system. And I think that's actually one of the biggest draws when you see local and organic markets popping up in Mexico. Often it's just concern over the quality of the food you're getting in the grocery store, not being something you want your family to consume. So I think that the rationale for developing local food systems has been quite different. In Canada, you see much more of an emphasis on the economic side, on keeping money within the local economy. And in Mexico, I think it's much more about that nutrition and really recentering on a healthy way of feeding yourself and your family.
What do you want people take away from these videos?
That's a good question. So I think in the last 5 or so years, there have been there's been a flurry of food documentaries. So more and more people are aware of some of the biggest problems in our food system. But still, when you have new food documentaries coming out, they're really focused on the problems. And that's not what we wanted to do here. We wanted to travel from Mexico to Canada and show the faces of local initiatives that are overcoming those challenges. So we really wanted it to be something constructive, something very forward-looking, and something that's focusing on the successes that people have seen, because you do have a lot of people that are working incredibly hard, and they have managed to develop these initiatives that are running. They're doing an amazing service to their community. So that's really what we want people to see, and to take inspiration from that and think about, how could I potentially do that in my community? What could I give back to my local food system?
You call them heroes.
Yeah, they are. They absolutely are. They're food heroes. They're, each and every one of them is coming to this not to make money. They're coming to it because they have a passion for their community and for really making the lives of the people around them much, much better. It's really incredible. I mean, I felt so inspired talking to each of them because they are so dedicated to what they're doing.
Wait a moment.
Yeah.
Okay, you know that Mexico, Canada, and the United States are renegotiating
Yes.
the free trade agreement. Do you think that local food systems could be a response to trade policies that always have a negative impact in the food producers, farmers?
Yeah, so I absolutely think that local food systems are one way of combating the risks associated with free trade agreements. So across the board, with something like NAFTA, for example, you do see large groups of farmers that are doing very well after the agreement was passed, but those are generally the much larger farmers that were already able to, increase the amount of land that they're using, increase the amount of capital that they're using on that land. So really the ones that are being disadvantaged are those small farmers that can't afford to increase the scale of their production, and they can't afford to sell at the prices that you get under a free trade agreement. So I do really see local food systems as one way of combating that risk, of giving producers control over how they sell their products, the prices that they're charging for their products, and really giving that power back to the producer to create their own markets. Yeah, so I absolutely think that it's an important way of protecting producers during these negotiations.
If you have the chance to say something about this topic to the people who are sitting on the table at the negotiation, what would you say?
I would say that they should listen to the voices of producers that aren't represented by the big organizations that are traditionally heard during these negotiations. So some of the most vocal supporters of bills like NAFTA are large agricultural boards, so things like the corn board or the soy board or the wheat board that really rely on those export markets. But those aren't all of the producers that feed us, and those aren't all of the people whose livelihoods are at stake in a negotiation like this. So I think that if you're representing the agricultural voice, you need to make sure that you're listening to the entire agricultural voice. And that includes young farmers, that includes small-scale farmers, that includes farmers that aren't focused on export markets. And it also includes people like farm laborers, it includes consumer voices, it includes really a diverse group of people that aren't necessarily represented within the traditional voices we hear leading up to a trade deal.
Okay. You still thinking that it's a scary time to be a farmer?
I think it's always been scary for farmers. I mean, you often hear people say, you know, I didn't get into farming to make money, because if I wanted to make money, I would have been doing something completely different. So it's not easy for any farmer, but I think that there's enough work going on to really highlight farmers as a crucial part of our society that while it might be scary, it's also an exciting time. There's a lot to get excited about, and there's a lot of really incredible work that I think is making things better day to day.
Finally, I read that you wrote your thesis about food movements in Mexico. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so as an undergraduate, I wrote my thesis on food movements as a response to NAFTA. And then right now, during my master's, I'm kind of continuing on that research and writing about local food networks in Mexico. So my original research was focused on the way that producers and consumers by working together can kind of combat some of the negative effects of free trade. So I was looking at particularly the effects of free trade in polarizing producers, really selecting a smaller group of large farmers as the winners of the free trade agreement, and leaving a much larger group of small-scale farmers without that critical source of income that they rely on. And some of the movements that I looked at were just really creative responses by citizens to make farmer livelihoods more viable. So things like participatory organic markets, which is a way of making sure that small-scale farmers can call themselves organic, but without going through the strenuous process of getting a third party to certify. I was looking at things like regional or local certification. So some organizations that have gotten together to define what their local food looks like, and then actually put a label on that. And really, these are all just very socially oriented projects, so they rely on relationships between people, and the ultimate goal is to boost those farmer livelihoods and make sure that they can continue to be that critical part of society.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, shall I pass this over to Rick?